Hey, it's Danny from projectmanaverse.com, and in this episode, I'm going to share with you three common risks and issues management mistakes. So let's jump into the video. First of all, what is a risk and an issue? Well, a risk is anything that threatens to impact your project in a negative way, anything that could derail your project. And it's usually a negative impact in terms of cost, quality, or timelines. So that's what a risk is. And if that risk actually materializes and actually happens, then the risk is no longer a risk. It now becomes an issue that you have to deal with. And risk and issues management is the identification, the assessment and classification, the communication, and the mitigation of risks and issues. And risk and issues management is a core essential part of a project manager's responsibilities. And if you take a job as a project manager, you're going to be expected to deal and manage risks and issues. And this is important for you because, as I say, risks and issues really do have the power to derail your project. They can they can knock it off its tracks and they can actually stop your ultimate go live date. And they can really cause you a lot of pain as a project manager. You don't want to be in a position where you've got constant issues that are cropping up because they've either been converted from risk because they weren't managed properly, or you just didn't anticipate them in the first place, and they seem to be fresh issues for you popping up left, right, and center. And you can get yourself in a situation where you're playing whack-a-mole with trying to firefight these issues, and you don't want to be there. So, what are the three common mistakes when it comes to risk and issues management that project managers make? And by the way, these are very common. Number one is that the description of the risk is not correct. The project manager is not describing the risk in the right way. And that's important because your stakeholders really do need to understand what the risk is, because if they don't understand it, they may not appreciate how serious it is, or they may not understand that the risk is going to impact them when it could do. So you really need to be clear when you're describing the risk. Sometimes I'll see a risk description, which is a sort of a blanket statement, but it doesn't really articulate what the risk is. So a little tip, you always want to start the sentence of your risk description with there is a risk that something is going to happen. There is a risk that we may not have the right resources we need for testing. And then after that, you want to put what the impact is. What's the actual so what? What's the impact of that risk occurring? In this case, if you don't have the resources you need to do the testing, then the testing is not going to get done. Therefore, your critical path milestones are not going to be met, which ultimately means you're not going to go live when you're supposed to go live. So you need to put in what is the risk and what is the impact. There's a lot more to it than that, but this is a short video. So if you stick with those, you'll be fine. One more tip as well. You need to write the risk in a way that pretty much anyone could understand it. So even if someone isn't a specialist in the industry that you're doing your project in, or the subject area you're doing your project in, they should still be able to understand it. So keep it high level, try and keep it simple, try and just put the high building blocks of the risk and the impact in there, and put the impacts. The impacts would usually ultimately come down to impact to the timelines, impact to the cost, or impact to the quality of the thing you're building. You might have to de-scope something, or it might not just work properly, etc., etc. So that's common mistake number one, very common. Try and avoid it. Common mistake number two is project managers don't actually try and mitigate the risks. They don't try and stop the risk from happening in the first place. What we often see is a project manager will log the risk in their risk log, and now they've almost done it as a tick box exercise. They've covered their own ass because they've got it logged. So if it happens, they can say, well, yeah, we thought this might happen. It's not a surprise. But they don't actually try and proactively stop the thing from happening. And all you need to do that is get together, create some time with your team, and really think about a solution, right? To say, right, guys, if we had to stop this risk from happening, what can we do? Give me some ideas. Let's bounce some ideas off each other and just jot some things down. And you'll soon find that there probably are things that you could do to stop the risk from happening. But you just don't be lazy with it. Actually, be proactive and have a session maybe every 2 weeks to look at your risks and think about how you can mitigate them, stop them from happening. Because if you can stop them from happening, you're onto a winner. You're knocking out these threats to your project, and you are making sure that your chances of success are as high as possible. Let me give you an example on this one. So I did a project once where we were doing an upgrade, And there were two key parts of this upgrade. It's very common. We were migrating a database, we were upgrading a database. And to do that, we had to migrate it to a new infrastructure. We couldn't do it in situ. And it was terabytes of data. It was a big database. And we were also going to upgrade the software as well. And the path was we first had to do the database migration to the new infrastructure because it was so big. And then once that was completed, only then could we do the software upgrade. That was the critical path, had to be database, then software. And the migration of the database was going to take about 2 or 3 weeks. It was happening around the clock 24/7. And it was just trickling across. There was so much data to get across there. And then once that happened, we had a weekend lined up to do the software upgrade. And that was the only weekend we could find for months either side. So it all had to be kind of done like clockwork. And the risk we had was this database migration wasn't going to complete in time for that weekend where we'd lined up the resources to do the actual upgrade. And this was a really important application in the business. So we had to do it out of hours on the weekend because people really needed it on their usual work days. So again, we thought, right, well, how can we stop this from actually happening? How can we mitigate this risk? So I put a meeting in and I challenged the engineers, and it wasn't that complex to come up with the answer. Well, let's just beef up all the infrastructure that's doing this migration and make it run as fast as possible. So there's various parameters that you can change in the database. You can put extra CPU, and you can do a lot of stuff that I didn't even understand. It doesn't matter if you don't understand as a project manager, as long as they do. Of course, there was a cost to doing that. It cost us a bit more, but it was only a temporary uplift of that infrastructure while we were doing the migration. Once it had completed, we could put it back down again. So it wasn't a huge cost. So that's what you want to do. You want to try and stop these risks from happening. And because we did that, it was actually flying across a lot faster than we anticipated. So we did mitigate that risk, and it didn't happen in the end. So happy days. So that's number 2 mistake. Number 3 mistake is that you don't actually have an action plan in case the risk actually occurs. So if the risk does happen, you need to be ready with a plan in terms of what are you going to do about it, how are you going to mitigate the impact of the risk if it does actually occur. So again, same kind of exercise, get together with your team and just come up with a plan, even if it's just a few bullet points saying, yeah, we'll do this, this, and this, and we'll need this and this and this to do that. Do we have that in place? Are we ready for that? You don't have to have pages and pages of a detailed plan. Even if you just have a few bullet points, you're going to be in a much stronger position if it does actually happen. If it happens, do you want to be right? Okay, don't panic. We know what to do. We've got this plan in place. We've got this kind of plan B. What you don't want to be in is in a position where it happens and you're just running around panicking. You don't know what to do, because that's a disaster. It's really bad planning, really bad project management. So make sure you do that. So going back to the example I just talked about, we also thought about what could we do if this actually happened. So we did a couple of things. Number one, we looked at the upgrade activities that we were planning to do on that weekend, and we went through it with a fine comb too. And we thought, right, what's everything that we could actually do in advance if we had to? We might have to get some certain approvals because we're doing things outside the normal way of doing things. But we did that. We went through it and we actually found quite a few things that we could do ahead of that weekend. And that ultimately shaved down the time that we would need on the weekend to do the upgrade. So if things were delayed, at least we bought ourselves a little bit more time to get everything done. That was one thing. The other thing we did, we thought, right, well, if this does happen, I know the business do actually need to use this application on the working days. So the best ideal was we get the upgrade done on the weekend, and then the business would come in on the Monday and they'd start using the application as normal. So what we did is we did a lot of stakeholder management and said, look, guys, look, we do have a risk that this upgrade might continue on for an extra day. So can we just get all the approvals and permissions and your buy-in to have the application down on that Monday? Can you work around it for that one day while we finish the upgrade if we need to? And again, you know how the story ends. The risk didn't occur in the end, but at least we had a plan ready in case it did happen. So that was a good mitigation plan to mitigate the impact if the risk did actually occur. Okay, that is the video. I'm going to wrap up there. I'm sure you found that useful, so please give it a thumbs up if you did. And if you want to see more videos like this one, hit that subscribe button. And until the next time, please take care.